Saya no Uta is the most disturbing visual novel ever made. Not because every inch of its grotesque world is caked in gore and viscera, nor is it a result of the game's masterful use of cosmic horror. It's not even because of its extremely uncomfortable subject matter, involving a childlike character as the romantic interest for its adult protagonist. No. It's because the game itself is corrupted and rotten to its very core. Released by Japanese studio Nitroplus in late 2003, Saya no Uta is a horror romance visual novel centering around a man named Fuminori, who, after losing both of his parents in a fatal car crash, is brought back from the brink of death using an experimental surgery. The operation is a success, but not without terrible side effects, as Fuminori's perception of reality is irreparably altered. The world he once knew is gone. His friends, the ground he walks on, the sky, cars, buildings, everything has changed, appearing to him, and only him, as unending, rotting piles of flesh and viscera. This new reality that Fuminori has found himself in, once terrifying and maddening, is now simply an ugly fact of life he has to deal with. He grits his teeth, holding back his cynical view of the world, and is forced to pretend that he doesn't see the world in this way, that his friends don't appear as screeching piles of rotting meat, lest he be locked away in some sort of insane asylum for the rest of his life. This torturous existence was simply too much for Fuminori to deal with, and certainly given enough time in this state, he would have probably taken the easy way out, until one day he meets someone who, in a sea of pulsating gore and flesh, appears normal. A young girl named Saya. What follows is a twisted and demented romance between these two lonesome beings who are rejected by the rest of the world. That will lead the two of them down a dark path and lead to disastrous consequences for their friends, the people in their lives, and potentially all of humanity. As the tagline for the VN goes, through witnessing their relationship grow and blossom, we will bear witness to a love that will change the world. Saya no Uta is, without a doubt, the most disturbing game I have ever played, and I'd like to talk about why. This game, and by extension this video, is not for the faint of heart. We're going to be delving into its rich and complex story, its themes of love, narcissism, and depravity, and why I believe that Saya no Uta is the most disgusting pile of filth I have ever experienced, and why I wish I never played this game. I don't feel comfortable having ever supported this game. In fact, I'd go as far as saying I absolutely despise this game. But first, a little bit of context. I've been trying to clear out my Steam library for a while now. I mean, at this point, it's just embarrassing. I've got games like Outer Wilds, Disco Elysium, Hi-Fi Rush, and so many other games I need to get through still, including a lot of visual novels I picked up when I was younger that I never got around to actually finishing. Yeah, back when I was a kid, I was actually really into visual novels on Steam. It's what got me into writing in the first place, and I was reminded of this fact when Reddit's algorithm decided that Yume Nikki, one of my favorite games, was apparently similar to another game that I had buried in my Steam library, Saya no Uta, a game that I frankly didn't even know that I owned. And this brings me to a very important point about visual novels as a medium. In the same way that being a fan of Evangelion is a lot more common than being a fan of the actual Gundam mecha animes it parodies, you're much more likely to find people making fun of visual novels than seriously engaging with them. This is in part due to the success of games like DDLC and My Side, but it's mostly because of the genre's well-earned reputation as gooner slop clogging up the Steam marketplace. But while not nearly as much as the case today, it's important to remember that visual novels have had a long and storied history when it comes to Japanese media coming over to the States, especially considering the influence that they've had over both gaming and anime. The idea of a visual novel being a serious creative endeavor has been around a lot longer than it's been the subject of parody, and I want to make that very clear when I discuss Saya no Uta, because this game isn't some obscure indie title or random gooner-bait slop game from Steam. It's a massive release from a major studio that was published over 20 years ago. It's as AAA as it gets when it comes to visual novels, and it's going to become clear why I'm making a point of this later on. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive into why Saya no Uta is disgusting. Saya no Uta begins with what should be a medical miracle success story, but like everything else in this game, things are far worse than they seem. As I already mentioned, Fuminori lost both of his parents in a car crash, and under normal circumstances would have likely died alongside them. However, thanks to him being a medical student and being in the vicinity of some of the world's most advanced and prestigious doctors around, he was saved using an experimental surgery. The operation ends up saving his life, of course, but his perception of reality changes. Everything around him appears as rotting flesh and gore. His friends look like walking corpses, and that's putting it lightly. Food tastes revolting, and the world itself has become a nightmare landscape that only he can see. As he contemplates suicide in his hospital bed, he sees something, or someone, that appears normal and beautiful in this otherwise horrific world he's found himself in. Saya. Her voice is normal, her clothing white and angelic. After a while of the two of them talking, it becomes clear that both of them feel like outcasts from the rest of the world, and naturally the two fall in love, eventually deciding to move in with one another, though with the stipulation that Fuminori agrees to help Saya find his father, a man named Dr. Ogai. Fuminori is desperate, of course, and easily agrees to these conditions. Eager to help Saya, he asks the hospital staff incessantly about her supposed father, Dr. Ogai, but his neurologist, Dr. Ryoko, is suspicious of these strange questions, as he shouldn't know who that is, and naturally she's not given any information. But still, the two are now together. At first, it seems like a really sweet and almost wholesome premise, and you start to think that this girl will end up rehabilitating Fuminori and helping him see the brighter side of the world and whatnot. But of course, there's a catch. Yeah, there's always a catch. In reality, Saya is an eldritch alien being from another world. And, as you may have guessed, while in Fuminori's skewed view of reality, Saya appears normal, to a normal person, her true form is horrific, to the point that just seeing her would drive a normal person to insanity. And of course she eats human flesh. Yeah, could have seen that coming. But to Fuminori, she's perfect. And to Saya, Fuminori represents something that she's never experienced before. Someone who can look at her without horror. Someone who can love her. But while from Fuminori's perspective, his life is seemingly finally reaching a sense of normalcy again, it's a vastly different story for his friends. After the crash, Fuminori was never the same. His friend group, consisting of Yo, Omi, and Koji, have been desperately trying to break through to him, to be there for him, but he constantly pushes them away, treats them coldly, and even outright breaks the heart of his former crush and love interest, cruelly rejecting her. He treats his friends like they're not even people. Of course, we know why he's doing that, but for his friends, all they see is a traumatized person who's changed so much after an accident that changed his life forever. Yo, of course, does not take his rejection well, and her friend Omi, sick of Fuminori's treatment of them, decides to go confront Fuminori, but ends up being murdered by Saya, who of course eats her corpse, and offers some to Fuminori as well, which he surprisingly finds delicious, compared to normal food, which tastes like human flesh. It's like the miracle berry of cannibalism. So now the two sort of act like a demented married couple, Fuminori coming home to Saya, preparing meals of human flesh for him. Meanwhile, Saya begins to experiment on other humans in order to try to make Fuminori happy. As it turns out, Saya is able to do the same thing to other humans that was done to Fuminori, to change his perception of reality. Though being a, little girl, she's not nearly as good as the trained professionals, and the surgery she does doesn't end very well. Saya pays a visit to Fuminori's neighbor Yosuke and gifts him with the same distorted perception that Fuminori has. And, as expected, Yosuke goes apeshit. Seeing his actual family members as monstrous piles of flesh, he murders them, thinking that they're here to hurt his family. And then, upon seeing Saya, the only normal-looking person in his perception, Yosuke attempts to rape her. Fuminori swoops in to rescue her, killing Yosuke, the game hilariously depicting this moment as proof that Fuminori is really a good person, despite being in a relationship with a little girl, abusing his friends, and killing and eating people. But hey, at least he's not a rapist. Foreshadowing is a literary device. This is the first real hint we get as to what actually happened to Fuminori. The fact that his condition is something that can be done to other people by Saya means that something related to her is responsible for Fuminori's condition. And it's also evidence that Fuminori isn't just going crazy and seeing things. I mean, he is going crazy and seeing things, but his perception of reality is not something innately exclusive to him. And this is where we get to make our first actual choice in the visual novel. With Saya now having a better understanding of the human brain after her experiment on Yosuke, she makes the ultimate offer to Fuminori, to fix his brain, to make his perception of reality normal again, meaning that Fuminori's world would go back to the way it was before, but Saya would appear in her true form. If Fuminori accepts Saya's offer, we get the game's first ending. Now, as a reminder, we get to make this choice after Saya already murdered 2 people and after Fuminori ate the flesh of another person and killed someone. So, needless to say, going back to normal isn't exactly the best outcome for Fuminori himself. He's quickly linked to the disappearances and locked away. Saya ends up visiting Fuminori in the mental hospital he's now stuck in, now able to see the world as it really is. The two, of course, still love one another, but Saya is aware of how she appears to normal people, now like Fuminori, and believes that it would be best if he never is able to see her true form. He doesn't even get to hear her real voice, communicating all of this through text messages on a phone. Maybe Saya was hurt that Fuminori chose the real world over her, or maybe this really is the best thing for Fuminori and she really does care. Regardless, Saya says goodbye and adventures off on her own to find her father, with Fuminori waiting forever for her return. It's presented as bittersweet by the game as the credits roll. In terms of the amount of actual harm caused to the world and people in general, this is probably the best ending, but of course, this is not even close to being the actual thematic conclusion for this game, so naturally, we're going to continue on with the other option. Believe me, I wish this was where it ended. In the other path, Fuminori chooses not to be cured by Saya, meaning that he's actively choosing to live in a hellish world if it means he gets to stay with Saya. His affection for her now goes deeper than just or affection or just being able to see something normal. He's actively willing to give up everything to continue to stay with her. And similarly, Saya is perfectly fine staying with Fuminori, even if it means giving up on her aforementioned goal of finding her father. Their love is, for all intents and purposes, true. Yay. But of course, back in the real world, Koji isn't doing too hot. Between the strange murder of Yosuke and his family and the disappearances of his friends, Koji begins to investigate what's going on, hoping to find Omi and perhaps learn more about what Fuminori's new deal is. At the same time, Fuminori, wanting to make Saya happy, decides to go out of his way to attempt to find Saya's father, the human doctor named Professor Ogai, which leads to an interesting situation. This leads both of them to attempt to find Ogai. Now, after Fuminori realizes that Koji is essentially on his tail now, he becomes especially paranoid, especially considering how many people he's already killed. So, in both an attempt to find Ogai and to get Koji out of the picture, Fuminori takes his former friend on a little road trip to an abandoned mountain cabin that Ogai used to live in. Koji falls for the trap and is pushed into a well by Fuminori, left to die. And since there's not much at the cabin for Fuminori to see, his business there is done and he heads back home to be with Saya. Almost to celebrate their victory, Saya gets a hold of Fuminori's former love interest, Yo, and with a more practiced hand, inflicts her gift onto Yo. Except, instead of being a human with messed up view of reality, Yo suffers a fate worse than death. In an agonizing process, Saya brutally transforms and mutates her into the same kind of eldritch horror that Saya is. This leaves Yo as a shell of her former self that Saya gifts to Fuminori for the two of them to use as a plaything. It seems like Fuminori has won. Not only has he effectively gotten away with all of his crimes, able to live peacefully with Saya, he's also tied up any loose ends through the murder of Omi, Yosuke, and seemingly Koji, but now he has a new plaything in the form of Yo as his slave. But miraculously, Koji survives, thanks to Dr. Ryoko. Yeah, in a shocking twist, Fuminori's neurologist, Dr. Ryoko, the normally professional and polite doctor from the start of the game, is actually aware of basically everything. She rescues him, and the two find a secret entrance to the basement of Ogai's cabin, leading to his secret research lab. It turns out Ryoko was working with, or at least was aware of, Dr. Ogai, who was the one who discovered and cared for Saya in her true form. And within the basement, Ryoko and Koji make a bombshell of a discovery. First, they discover Dr. Ogai himself, at least what's left of him. But more importantly, the two discover extensive research that Dr. Ogai has written about Saya and her species. As it turns out, Saya was brought to Earth using Dr. Ogai's experiments, though exactly how she got here isn't clear. The methods seem to be a mix of science and the occult, further solidifying Saya's Lovecraftian origins. But what he does know is that Saya is a member of a species of these eldritch beings, described as having spongy or fabric-like bodies that can transform into any shape, regenerate from any blunt trauma, and are fast enough to break a human's neck with little to no effort. These beings can modify, consume, and absorb the flesh of any species they come across after getting their genetic code, which is also their primary method of reproduction. They arrive at a planet, consume many different life forms, and then, with the knowledge of their genetic code, spread their spores around the planet and transform all life forms on the planet into more of them. What's interesting, though, is that Saya doesn't seem to be like the other members of her species. Maybe it's because of how she got to Earth, or because of her young age, but despite that, she possesses an unfathomable knowledge, able to solve complex mathematical equations and communicate easily with Ogai. Because the primary goal of Saya's species is reproduction, she wanted to learn more about it, specifically human biology and human reproduction. So Ogai, wanting to satiate her curiosity and wanting to teach her more about humanity, gave her a bunch of books, romance novels. And this is what forever changed Saya. Because Saya's entire biological purpose is the continued existence of her species. But now, she believes that the only way she can reproduce as a human is love. She determines through these books and Ogai that love is the objective of human existence, which means now that the only way that Saya can reproduce is if she truly falls in love. And if that were to happen, she would be able to spread her spores and turn all of Earth into eldritch beings like her. Thanks to the research, Koji and Ryoko now have the crucial information about Saya's true nature and origins, giving them the knowledge they need to better understand and hopefully put a stop to her. Koji returns to Fuminori's home where he finds physical evidence, the flesh of Omi and Yosuke's family stored in the refrigerator. Now, Koji knows everything, and is ready to take down Fuminori and stop Saya, avenging his friends and finally putting an end to this nightmare. We now get to witness the final confrontation between Koji and Fuminori. Koji pulls up to Fuminori's hideout, gun in hand, ready to kill him. However, before he can find him, he ends up discovering what remains of Yo, in agony, begging him for death. In a panic after seeing Yo's true form and desperate to put an end to her suffering, Koji empties his gun into Yo and puts her out of her misery. But now, all Koji has is an empty gun and a pipe, basically unarmed, and at the mercy of Fuminori and Saya, who is already rapidly approaching Koji with murderous intent. This is where the game diverges into two possible endings, depending on a final choice you'd make earlier in the game. Koji can choose to either call Fuminori and confront him directly, or call Ryoko for backup. If Koji calls Ryoko for backup, when Saya goes in for the kill, Ryoko comes in at the last second and gives Koji liquid nitrogen, which he uses on Saya to freeze her. And as her final heroic act, Ryoko manages to get a perfect shotgun blast on the frozen Saya, shattering her and finally putting an end to this madness. Fuminori, seeing Saya dead, loses all reason to live. He doesn't even bother exacting any sort of revenge on Koji or the already dying Ryoko. Instead, he kills himself, with a mortally wounded Saya crawling over to die alongside him. In the end, Koji is left alone, truly alone. He's the only survivor. And though justice may have been served and humanity potentially saved from Saya, he's all alone. Time passes, and Koji now suffers from severe PTSD, having constant nightmares and visions of all that he's seen, even talking to a hallucination of Ryoko from time to time. He ponders if there are other anomalies like Saya out there in the world, kept hidden by corporations and governments and other people like Ogai and Ryoko. His view of the world is truly broken, his normalcy gone after viewing under the veil. He buys a single bullet for his gun and leaves it in his bathroom medicine cabinet, just in case one day comes along where he can't continue living anymore after everything he's seen, just like Fuminori. The other ending occurs if Koji decides to clutch up and try and take on Fuminori all on his own. The fight plays out almost exactly the same way, with Koji ending up unarmed after mercy killing Yo, except this time, Ryoko isn't there to save him. Koji, with his steel pipe, goes in to finally end this madness, overpowering Fuminori and attempting to kill him. However, Fuminori is saved by Saya, and the two end up killing Koji. Again, it seems like Fuminori has finally won and truly tied up any last loose ends, but something is wrong with Saya. She's weak, very weak, and seemingly not because of the fight. No, Saya is pregnant, and seemingly she's about to die. Fuminori is obviously very distraught by this, desperate for a way to save her, promising to do anything to cure her of what's going on, willing to give up anything, everything like he's already done to make sure she's okay. But to his surprise, Saya simply comforts him, saying that this was meant to happen, as Saya has now done what she came here to do, to reproduce. And for her, that meant falling in love. As her final parting gift to Fuminori, she releases flower petals, beautiful angelic spores that cover the entire earth, transforming humanity into beings just like her. And presumably, this means that Fuminori will finally be freed of his gruesome perception of reality, not by normalcy, but by the world transforming into a beautiful heaven-like landscape built from Saya's love. Around the planet, the world finally resembles what Fuminori has seen this entire time. Gore and viscera covering everything, as all of humanity begins to change and transform. Ryoko hides out in Ogai's cabin, learning everything she can about Saya and trying to fight the transformation. But by the end, she realizes it's all for naught. So she takes one last sip of her whiskey and allows herself to be transformed. This ending is widely considered to be the true ending of Saya no Uta. In the end, the game makes good on its promise to us, as we do indeed bear witness to a love that changes the world. Whether that change is salvation or damnation depends entirely on your perspective, but the game seems to think that this apocalyptic ending is, well, beautiful. The story presented by Saya no Uta is an extremely captivating one from the very beginning, and for being a relatively short visual novel, it does a lot with its words. It is rich and dense, like a liver. Ew. Anyway, before I address the legally dubiously aged elephant in the room, I want to go over the things that Saya no Uta does amazingly when it comes to its horror and storytelling. So let's begin with Fuminori. The concept of seeing literally everything as a gory nightmare landscape except for one single person is really interesting. Perception is something I don't really see played with too much when it comes to horror media, at least the stuff that I end up seeing. But its potential for scares and the exploration of mental disorders and trauma has always been something I've really been interested in, and I always notice and love it when it's used in horror media. My favorite example of this is, well, The Ghost Girl from Lethal Company, a monster that only one person can see at a time, invisible to everyone else, making the victim genuinely seem like they're a crazy person as they're tormented by the Ghost Girl. This, of course, can make for some great moments in a fun multiplayer setting, but in fiction like Sayano Uta, this kind of difference in perspective serves an extremely visceral way of forcing the reader into the protagonist's shoes. And just like how your experience changes vastly based on whether or not you can see the Ghost Girl, perception is a powerful tool in storytelling for forcing you to understand a character, even when you might not want to. Think about it from the perspective of Koji or any of Fuminori's other friends. After a devastating car crash and the loss of his family, Fuminori's personality takes on a drastic shift. He acts differently, treats everyone around him like shit, acts like he's the most important person in the world. From that outside perspective, you would absolutely despise Fuminori, and justifiably so. But when you're in Fuminori's shoes, you don't just feel the weight of the trauma and medical malpractice, you literally see it. Everything is different after the crash. You can't take a single step without seeing gore and blood. Everything smells different, everything tastes revolting. Living is terrifying and worthless. PTSD, trauma, these terms get thrown around a lot in this kind of media, but Sayano Uta forces you to live through it, and it's hell. And if you're in the same position that Fuminori was in, you would probably feel the same way. And so when Saya shows up and gives Fuminori some semblance of reprise from this dark and empty world he's grown so used to, well, can you blame him for just giving up on everything else? From his perspective, he and Saya are the only things that matter, that can matter. You see him commit violent act after violent act, and the whole time, even though it's disgusting and horrible, you know what he's going through in his head, what he sees. In my opinion, this is almost a perfect allegorical representation of narcissism. It's easy to hate someone for being full of themselves, but the actual medical condition of narcissism isn't just the evil disease that makes you an asshole. Being an actual narcissist is painful and exhausting and torturous, whether you're aware of it or not. And while some fans of Sayano Uta may disagree with me here, I think that this narcissism angle perfectly explains all of Fuminori's behaviors. I think that in the universe of Sayano Uta, if Fuminori was seeing anyone else for a therapist, they would probably diagnose him as a narcissist. And speaking of which, the depravity of Fuminori's actions. Fucking horrifying. And while it's easy to hate him by the end of the game, regardless, you see the path he goes down. You understand every action that he takes. And I think that might be the most scary part about Fuminori, especially from the perspective of the other characters. A masked, faceless killer that does horrible things for seemingly no reason is really scary, because you can't understand their motive. Your brain fills in the gaps, and the only conclusion you can come to is that beneath the mask is pure evil. But that's not Fuminori. You see every step that it takes for him to go from a normal person going to medical school with friends and aspirations and love to a monster that does the most unspeakable acts a person can do. And yet, you know why he does it. There's no nameless, faceless evil, no poorly written mental illness to blame everything on. You see each step lead to the next, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I mean, except if you pick this option here, but you know. Fuminori's almost the perfect blameless antagonist. Someone doing undeniably evil things, and yet basically anyone in his shoes would probably feel it's the only way one could live in such an existence without resorting to suicide. But of course you have to look at it through the other perspective. The hell it must be to exist around Fuminori if your name isn't Saya. It's just horrifying, and not just because of the rape. I think that there is a painfully tragic realism to the way that Fuminori's relationship with his friends falls apart throughout the story. A lot of people know what it's like to be friends with someone who's clearly going through it, seeing them go through trauma and tragedy, and trying to be a good friend, trying to be the one to lift them up and be there for them, desperate to make sure that they end up alright in the end, only to realize that it's beyond the scope of what you're capable of. The insults you have to endure, the pain you have to tank, the reassurances, the scares, seeing them hurt themselves, before eventually you realize that it's just as hard to take care of yourself as it is to take care of them. And then, inevitably, you have to let them go. It's easy to scare someone with a monster lurking in the corners of the darkness, or to unnerve them with gore and abuse, but it's hard to replicate that kind of genuine guilt and anxiety over watching someone you care about fall apart. And the fact that Sayano Uta does that so well is genuinely extremely impressive, especially considering that it is far from being the focal point of the game's narrative. I mean, you could make an entire story just about that. And then there's Saya, the titular main character of the game, the one that steals the show and steals your pancreas. Saya, without a doubt, has the strongest characterization of anyone in this game, and that's really saying something considering all we've talked about with Fuminori. She looks like a normal girl to Fuminori and acts like it for the most part, yet there is something clearly otherworldly about her mannerisms, the way she speaks and acts. It's not like other anime-adjacent media that just slaps the label of 4-billion-year-old dragon angel on a little girl and calls it a day. Saya is clearly someone who is written to be inhuman. And yet, while her interplanetary origins paint her as this cosmic virus monster who came here to create their own Kryptonian harem, and she certainly acts that way, the way that she was raised by Ogai and how she was treated like any other person, it changed her. Love changed her. Literally. Her understanding of what love is literally changes her biology in such a human way that it ends up being her defining trait. I really enjoy that the story uses Saya to explore love in the context of reproduction. From a purely evolutionary perspective, romantic love is problematic. Obviously, people make babies with people they don't fall in love with all the time, but generally, love is something that humans desire more than anything, something that most will be willing to give up basically anything for. And yet, in the context of evolution, love just kind of gets in the way of pumping out more babies. Compare that to Saya's species, whose entire deal is widespread assimilation and reproduction with no other meaning to it. For Saya, what love is may as well be a reproductive disorder. For Saya, love corrupted her just as much as it gave her something worth living for. From a utilitarian standpoint, love is a detriment to reproduction, and yet perhaps it's the only thing that makes us human. The only thing that separates you or me from something like Saya's species. Love is what makes us human. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to my GOAT Ryoko. What a fucking amazing character. In a game full of characters riddled with fear and trauma that act irrationally based on love and survival, a character like Ryoko is just so refreshing. She almost takes on the role of a Ash Williams type character, someone who fights back against the horrors that make most people crumble. As Fuminori's doctor, I was really expecting her to just be a generic background character meant to deliver exposition, and she could have easily been written like that. But instead, she is a fully realized character with a unique jaded philosophy and outlook on life that never gives up trying to understand the world and the things that conflict with her rational view of reality, even when all hope is lost. God, she's just so fucking cool. Ryoko is best girl, and I will not be arguing with anyone. I wish that I could just end the video here. I want to keep talking about all the things this visual novel does perfectly. Its cosmic horror, its characters, the suspense, the writing, romance, everything. But sadly, that's not why we're really here, is it? I'm done giving the devil his due. Okay, let's do this. I thought that Sayano Uta was an amazing game before it was tainted with all the pedophilia shit. Saya is a childlike character that has the physical appearance and mannerisms of a child. Both the game's narrative and Fuminori's internal dialogue constantly make reference to how cute Saya is, her innocence and youthful qualities. It's at the forefront of nearly every scene with her, and that does not stop with the safe work moments of the game. I'm sure you can parse the rest. Now, sure, a lot of Japanese media really likes to include characters like this, especially when they can be put in compromising positions. And most of said media is just absolute degeneracy made by people who enjoy seeing little Japanese girls in scenarios. But obviously, we've just spent the past however long talking about how competently written Sayano Uta is. Its deeply intelligent understanding of trauma, its unflinching critique of the most horrific acts a person can do. With how thoughtfully Sayano Uta handles Fuminori and Saya's descent into depravity, you would think that it would similarly condemn Fuminori for having a relationship with a character that looks and acts like a child, but you'd be wrong. This game contains multiple explicit scenes involving Saya that I won't describe in graphic detail that actively sexualize and fetishize the fact that Saya is childlike. I need to address them to explain why they're so problematic, and I'm not going to describe in detail what goes on in these scenes, but you'll get the picture. Now, it should be noted that I did not play the full uncensored version of this game. I don't fucking want to. I played the version as it is on Steam, and that on its own is already incredibly not safe for work. And I do not want to imagine what's in the full version, and I say this because there may be other scenes in the game that I'm not aware of. So, sorry. The first scene in question is between Saya and Fuminori. Despite the fact that Saya is, again, built like a child, this part reads explicitly as a typical porn game. The narrative skating right over the fact that Saya looks like a kid, at least in terms of its moral analysis. The game and its literal text fetishize and sexualize Saya's body in extremely graphic and disturbing ways, and not for the sake of horror. It's tonally clashing to the point that it feels like parody. Like, imagine if there was suddenly a Garfield comic strip in the middle of reading Twilight. Like, it's on that level. Second, you have the scene where Saya inflicts her gift onto Yosuke, who then attempts to assault her. This part of the game, while obviously extremely distressing and disturbing, is actually something I feel makes complete sense to be in a game like this. Obviously, I don't want to see a little girl being assaulted by an old man, but given the context of the scene and the way it's written, it doesn't come off as disturbing fetish material, but rather as straight horror writing that treats the assault as the traumatic, horrific event that it should be. It feels like something out of an actual horror novel, and that is something I genuinely respected at first. Then Fuminori shows up and rescues Saya from Yosuke, violently murdering him, and then Saya cries and jumps into his arms. The game depicts this moment as a heroic, positive side of Fuminori exclusively. Literally, he kills the monster and saves the girl. It's as explicit as you can get. It doesn't play this moment to show Fuminori being possessive over Saya, not wanting another person involved with his childlike lover. It doesn't acknowledge that Saya is now in the arms of another adult man after this. No, it heroizes Fuminori for saving Saya. And here's the thing, I played the censored version of this game. So all of that stuff I said about it being written as genuine horror and being more respectable, well, you might as well throw that stuff out of the window, because I am 90% certain that the uncensored version also fetishizes Saya being raped. But hey, at least Fuminori is better than being just a plain old rapist like Yosuke ended up being, right? Right? Then we get to the third scene, and this is where the game loses all credibility for me. Yo is transformed by Saya into the same kind of monster that she is, in a torturous, agonizing process that takes hours and leaves Yo as a shell of who she used to be. Again, this scene starts as legitimate horror, the psychological torture of an innocent character being forcibly changed into something monstrous. Saya presents the transformed Yo as a gift to Fuminori, which is genuinely disturbing and fits into the story's themes. And of course, Yo cannot and does not consent to any of this happening to her, so when Fuminori and Saya end up using her, it is explicitly rape. So you would think that the narrative would call this out, that Fuminori was once violently angry about seeing Saya being victimized and is now happily engaging with such acts himself. You would think that the narrative would use this moment to show how far Fuminori has gone. But no, instead, it just gets weird. Saya and Fuminori just go on and on about how pretty Yo is and then talk about the boundaries of their relationship, and Saya gets all weird and says she wants to watch. Like, what the fuck is happening? This is supposed to be a horror game. Now it feels like I'm in the polyamory group chat. And to top it all off, the scene of course completely fetishized this moment of Saya and Fuminori raping another character, and plays it as totally straight, completely abandoning the horror of what's actually happening, the brutal assault of an innocent woman. And remember, the game just painted him as a hero for saving Saya from the same fate as before, so So why? This is a consistent problem throughout the entire game. You have the game's story that normally takes itself seriously as a work of horror fiction, but then when these scenes show up, it's like you're playing a totally different kind of visual novel, one that's designed for an audience I don't even want to think about. And it's this inconsistency and frankly hypocrisy that's so frustrating. The game clearly understands the horror of what it's depicting and what's happening in every other context. But when it comes to these sexual scenes involving Saya, all of that moral clarity just vanishes. I mean, these are moments where we are witnessing an adult man who, mind you, is a murderer, cannibal, and rapist have intimate encounters with a childlike character. You would think that these moments in Saya no Uta would be fucking horrifying, that they're nightmare-inducing, things that would get under your skin and make you feel like you're witnessing the absolute worst of humanity. But the way that they're written clearly has other intentions. These moments are sexualized, fetishized, romanticized, whatever you want to call it. It's fan service. And I just have to ask, why? Were the developers of Saya no Uta trying to make some sort of statement about these depraved crimes by presenting them this way? Did they want to just pander to people with lolly fetishes and try to sell copies? Was it both? Neither? I don't know. I have no clue what the intention here was. It's like these parts of the game were written by totally different teams of people. Whatever the intention here was, the execution is just wrong. It took an incredibly beautiful and sophisticated cosmic horror story and ruined it by injecting it with exploitative sexual content for what seems like no reason. If there's some kind of deeper meaning here, I completely missed it. I can only assume the reason that Saya looks the way she does is that the game can sexualize her body, and it makes me fucking furious. You know why? Because it's not like they wrote themselves into a corner and had to depict her this way. Saya isn't human. Her physical form is an illusion. She could look like literally anything. She could look like an adult woman, or a human woman with eldritch horror design elements, or someone who vaguely resembles Yo to tie into Fuminori's past. I mean, fuck, make her a squid monster, or some abstract geometric shape. Anything that could serve the story's themes of perception and enhance the cosmic horror. But instead, they chose to make her look like a child. Why? What narrative purpose did this serve beyond just pandering to pedophiles? And before you say anything, no, you can't argue that Saya being built like a little girl is meant to show how evil and despicable Fuminori is, or demonstrate the corruption of her childlike innocence, because one, Fuminori is rewarded by the narrative for this relationship with Saya, and two, the game constantly does the work of sexualizing Saya for him. Japanese media has had a massive problem with the sexualization of youth and children, and if this was just any generic visual novel, don't get me wrong, it would still be unacceptable, but at least I would expect that kind of shit. But Saya no Uta isn't just any visual novel, it's one of the best visual novels ever made by competent people who, aside from all the Saya shit, know how to tell a story. Am I really supposed to just accept the fact that even great stories from skilled people are just going to have lolly shit in them just because it's anime adjacent media? It breaks my heart. It was so close to being perfect, a masterpiece of Lovecraftian storytelling, its psychological depth, its exploration of trauma, the way it forces you to understand a monster without excusing their actions, it's all there. All the pieces of something truly special, something I feel like could be talked about in the same breath as The Call of Cthulhu, The King in Yellow, The Color Out of Space. I mean it! And instead, I come away feeling filthy. I bought this game when I was a child. It's when I was a kid that I discovered visual novels like The Way We All Go, Everlasting Summer, Katawa Shoujo, some of the best visual novels ever, works that inspired me to become a writer. I wanted to read more visual novels and explore the medium because I genuinely love what this art form has to offer. And what do I get for finally giving this game a chance? The realization that I'm complicit in something that I've supported financially that I would never support if I knew what I was getting myself into. And the worst part is, I feel like I'm a fucking crazy person for even saying all of this, because all I see online are people talking about this game for the masterpiece I thought it could be. When people talk about this game, it feels like they just gloss over the fact that Saya is sexualized for looking like a little kid. And it's like, am I the only one who sees what's wrong with this? Am I the only one that sees this game for what it really is, while everyone else just moved on pretending everything was fine? It's disgusting! It's the corruption of something that could have been beautiful and meaningful and important. The game had every chance to be better, and it chose not to be. And you know what? Maybe I'm being too harsh on the game. Because I talked to some people who actually liked this game before I made this video, and someone actually raised an interesting counter-argument. That the scenes with Fuminori and Saya are meant to be filtered through Fuminori's warped perception of reality. Of course he would see himself as heroic. Of course he views his relationship with Saya as romantic rather than predatory. He's an unreliable narrator whose reality is completely distorted. He's literally in love with a being whose entire biological processes involve tricking other species into breeding with it. And honestly, that's probably the correct reading. But that just makes it so much worse! It would be brilliant if the game was actually using Fuminori's perspective to show how abusers rationalize their actions, how they construct these narratives in their head where they're actually the ones that are the hero. But if that was the intent, it completely failed, because the game doesn't do any work to signal that we should be horrified by these scenes rather than titillated by them. Everything here feels like it's designed for exploitation rather than critique. Maybe the game is so effective at putting us in Fuminori's headspace that it makes us complicit in his self-justifications. If this is meant to be a condemnation of Fuminori's perspective, where are the signals telling us to reject what we're seeing? Why aren't we cutting to other characters' perspectives to show the reality of what's actually happening here? Imagine if, just for a moment, we got to experience the game through Yo's perspective. Just imagine how horrific and genius it would be to show just how monstrous Fuminori is truly in the real world from the perspective of his actual victim, but it doesn't. And that's what makes this so maddening. Even when I try to give the game the benefit of the doubt, even when I consider the most charitable interpretation possible, I still come away feeling like I'm watching a piece of art rot in real time, like it's been infected, twisted into something horrible and unrecognizable, lose its soul and become... Wait. Hang on, that sounds familiar. Like watching a piece of art you love lose its soul and become tainted. Like I'm complicit in something disgusting while being unable to look away. Oh God. Is that what just happened to me? Have I been describing my own experience playing this game, or have I been describing what happens to literally every character in Saya no Uta? Fuminori falls in love with something beautiful only to discover that it's a monster, and to be driven to commit the most heinous acts a person can commit. Koji tries to save his best friend, only to become traumatized beyond repair after learning the truth. Yo gets rejected for trying to confess her feelings and ends up being transformed into a tormented monster against her will. Ryoko tries to learn about the world and understand the unknowable, only to become consumed by the exact thing she tried to understand. Even Saya thought that love was the meaning of life and tried to find that love in Fuminori, in humanity, only in the end to be hurt and raped and eventually die. And here I am, drawn to this game by its unique premise and artistic merit, trying to analyze and understand it, only to find myself horrified and disgusted by ever having supported it. Like I've been corrupted myself for taking part in it. Oh God. Have I been duped this entire time? Is my disgust and horror at this game exactly what it was designed to make me feel? Am I experiencing the exact same corruption that every character in the story goes through, finding something that seems beautiful and meaningful only to discover that it's infected with something monstrous? Because if that's true, if my own journey is meant to mirror Fuminori's journey through his corrupted perception, then this isn't just exploitive garbage with good writing attached. This is something far worse. This is a piece of media that understands how to make you feel horror, but it doesn't just depict disgusting things. It, in and of itself, is disgusting, immoral, problematic, and uses that fact to its advantage by making you a real victim of its horror. What you feel about this game is real. The horror that you feel about seeing it, it's real. It's not discussed at fictional actions. The game exists. You paid for it. You paid money for it. And the horror it makes you feel for participating in it is real. Even if you try to reject its premise out of disgust and morality, try to refund the game, delete it from your account, leave a negative review on Steam, make a video essay about it, you're doing exactly what the game intended of you. Sayano Uta, as a game, is just like the eldritch alien it depicts. It draws you in with genuine artistry, makes you complicit in viewing disturbing content, and then leaves you questioning whether or not your disgust is justified or if you've become a part of the very thing you're trying to critique. And that realization is more disturbing than any of the explicit content could ever be. Because now I don't know if I've experienced something genuinely exploitive that happens to have good writing attached to it, or if I've experienced a work of art so sophisticated that it used my own moral outrage as part of its horror. I don't know if the creators included that content because they're pandering to people with disturbing fetishes, or because they knew that moral audiences would be drawn in by high-quality writing and then forced to confront our own complicity in consuming it. I don't know if this game is exploitative trash or if it's a masterpiece of meta-horror that's more brilliant than I ever wanted it to be. And that uncertainty, not knowing whether or not I'm a victim of exploitation or a participant in art, might be the most horrifying thing about Sayano Uta. The idea that maybe this is exactly what they intended me to feel. That I've been changed by it. Sayano Uta is disgusting. Not because of the story it tells, but because the art within it has been corrupted by exploitive content involving a character designed to look like a child. I hate this game. And the part that makes me the most upset is that I think that's exactly what the game wanted me to feel. Sayano Uta is a visual novel that accomplishes remarkable things in its exploration of dark themes, but beyond that, it is one of the most well-written works of cosmic horror of the 21st century. The game succeeds brilliantly at what Lovecraft and related authors often attempted but rarely achieved, making the other feel truly alien while still telling an emotionally resonant story. Saya herself is a fascinating character study in how love might function for a being whose entire existence is predicated on assimilation, with the question of whether her feelings for Fuminori represent genuine emotion or some kind of beautiful malfunction never being fully answered and left ambiguous. Fuminori is an extremely well-written protagonist for the story, for the most part, with the game literally putting you behind his eyes and showing you the world through his own twisted perception. The game forces you to understand what he sees, what he goes through, and invokes a unique kind of horror where you understand fully each violent and unforgivable act he commits. And of course, the supporting cast. You have Koji, who is the perfect foil to Fuminori, as he desperately attempts to hold on to his understanding of the world and onto his friends. Omi and Yo, well-written and likable characters that never deserve the fates and horrific victimization they were subjected to. And of course, my favorite character, my home slice Ryoko, with her clinical and cynical worldview and holder of the title of most badass character in a piece of horror media. Sorry, Ash Williams. And even the flawed optimism of Ogai and the monstrous breakdown of Yosuke. Every character plays their part in the story near flawlessly, with each one being written with a realism that makes each of their tragic fates genuinely impactful. Sayano Uta is a game that genuinely understands trauma and the worst of humanity, which makes it all the more saddening that the game ended up how it did. These elements combine to create what should have been a masterpiece, but it's impossible to separate these achievements from the game's fundamental moral failings. From the sexualization of a childlike character, to the way the game heroizes a rapist, to the tonal inconsistencies of its depictions of sexual abuse, Sayano Uta, through cynical pandering, incompetence, malice, or whatever else, is a game and work of art that ultimately squanders its own brilliance in service of the inexcusable. Visual novels, as a medium, have always had enormous potential for serious storytelling, but that potential is constantly undermined by works like Sayano Uta that use artistic sophistication as a cover for exploitative content. This is not an isolated problem and is no way exclusive to Sayano Uta. We can see examples of this in basically all media, TV shows, movies, books, video games, where genuine artistic talent becomes entangled with these harmful elements. I mean, there are tons of extremely infamous examples of this, such as Cuties, the movie that claims to critique the sexualization of children in media while doing exactly that. Or The Coffin of Andy and Lele, which is frankly even worse than Saina Uta when it comes to being a Goonerbait fetish game, but that's an entirely different video. Hell, even something like Yandere Simulator is guilty of this. And even something like Lolita, which many praise as a masterpiece and genius work of art, is often accused of being just exactly as we see with these other works here. And so all of this begs the question, how do we engage with works that contain both genuine artistic merit and genuinely harmful content? Do we attempt to separate the art from its moral failings? Do we reject it entirely? Or do we try to understand the contradictions and acknowledge both its achievements and its inexcusable elements? We live in extremely volatile times where both brilliant art and insidious propaganda often come from the same sources, where beloved creators turn out to be reprehensible people, where something can be both a masterpiece and fundamentally corrupted. And so I honestly think that we're going to start to see more and more art that does what Saina Uta does. Art that is insidious, hiding something more horrific beneath the surface that you may not realize is even there until it's too late. You know, when I decided to finally play this game, I did not know how long it was going to be, and I ended up going through it over the course of a few nights. It was a horror game after all, and so I thought it would be cool to experience it at night and really immerse myself. That was a mistake. Over the course of my playthrough, I suffered from intense nightmares, and that continued for weeks after. That was months ago, and even now, I still feel sick and uneasy just thinking about this game. And as I'm sure you've realized now, it's not just because it's so scary. This game is going to stick with me for a very long time, not just as an example of exceptional horror writing, but as a reminder of how easily something beautiful can become something monstrous, how even trying to analyze and critique a work can entangle you in its own moral contradictions. But the thing that gets under my skin the most is the nagging possibility that this corruption might be intentional, that this game could be designed to make the audience complicit in the very depravity it depicts and critiques, turning that moral outrage back onto them as a form of meta-horror. The idea that it transforms viewers into unwitting participants in its themes of moral decay. And that possibility alone makes me feel like I can't even win against this game. Not that I can't beat the game, but that I can't win, like I can't fight it. Even the idea of rejecting the game outright feels like it's somehow the point. By making this video, by spending hours analyzing its themes and wrestling with its contradictions, am I falling for exactly what it wanted me to? But I'm self-aware enough to recognize when I might be making a fool of myself. Maybe I'm just engaging in some elaborate form of cope, constructing this whole meta-narrative, trying to make all these points about art and insidious problematic content to justify why I found value in something that disgusts me and goes against my morals. Maybe my uncertainty about the game's intentions is just my way of avoiding the more simple, uncomfortable truth. Maybe the developers are genius meta-horror masterminds who plan for this exact kind of response. Maybe they're people who simply wanted to include exploitive content and found a way to justify it. Or maybe, just maybe, the game isn't as good as I thought it was. I'll probably never know for certain. And maybe that uncertainty is the point. Maybe that's the most unsettling thing about Saina Uta. Not knowing whether you encounter something genuinely brilliant and beautiful, or something that is seriously fucked up in every conceivable way, and not being able to cleanly separate the two. But even if I have been manipulated by some sort of work of artistic genius, even if my moral outrage is part of some elaborate design, it doesn't change what the game actually contains. Whatever artistic merit this game possesses, it still sexualizes a character designed to look like a child. That's inexcusable, no matter how sophisticated the horror writing around it might be. The corruption I sought to analyze has become a part of me. Whether that was the game's intention or not, whatever Saina Uta is, a masterpiece, a work of exploitation, or something more complex I'll never understand, it has left its mark. And that is something that most visual novels, most games, will never do. And for better or for worse, that is the impact of Saina Uta. In the end, I suppose I have borne witness to a love that changed the world. My world, at least. And I'm not sure I'll ever feel clean again.
You'll never let loose